Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm your host, Matt Bennett. Each episode we talk about the research and practical aspects of the trauma informed movement. This podcast is not designed to replace mental health services. If you feel uncomfortable or triggered by our discussion, please consider seeking your own trauma treatment. In no way is seeking treatment an admission of weakness. It is a chance to build resiliency and experience post-traumatic growth. You can find show notes, resources, and more at traumainformedlens.org. Welcome, friends, to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm Matt. I'm here today with Dr. Cusimano to talk about a topic I'm really fascinated in exploring around divorce as an adverse childhood experience. I have some thoughts on this that I'm really excited to explore with Angela. And before we get into that, I'll give Angela just a chance to introduce herself, a little about her expertise before we dive into this interesting and exciting topic.
Great. Thanks for having me. I so appreciate being here with you. So yes, I'm a licensed psychologist by trade, and I specialize mainly in working with kids and families, but I also treat military veterans that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm recently kind of branching into the coaching world where I want to specifically develop a program for childhood survivors of divorce, because I think it's kind of it's a hard niche to recruit into a therapy practice. I mean, it's hard to say, okay, if you had divorce in your childhood, come see me for therapy. And I think in my interactions with folks that are survivors of divorce in childhood, they don't always make those connections between the divorce happening in their childhood and the struggles that they're having in their current life. So right now I'm in full-time private practice, working with kids and families and also our military veterans. I'm also an Air Force veteran myself. So I did my residency.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. And so, it's part of my way of giving back to, my brothers and sisters in arms to be able to continue to serve them and make sure that their mental health is taken care of. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also a childhood survivor of divorce. So that kind of spurred all of my interest in this. And, honestly, I decided to become a psychologist when I was 9 years old and my parents were going through a divorce. So, I mean, this whole concept of divorce is really what made me who I am today and is really like my passion and I feel like my purpose.
Excellent. Well, let me dive into this because I mean, when we connected, I was so excited to learn about your expertise and your interest in divorce because, it's interesting because I think one of the things with the ACE study that I question a little bit is where does childhood end? We always say 18, but neurobiologically, kind of looks like 25 is the end of sort of developmental adolescence. So my parents got divorced when I was 22. So I obviously 22, you've got a little bit of resiliency built up that you might not if you're 5 years old or younger in childhood. But I know it was a really I think I look back at my life and one of those things in my life that just changed so much. Even though I wasn't living in the home, my home was no longer there was all these shifts. I had to who do I go for Christmas? So even as a young adult survivor of divorce, I know the impact it had on me with it as well. But one of the things that is I use the ACE study in the trauma trainings I do for professionals across the country. You get to some of these, you go through the historic 10 ACEs and divorces kind of last on the list. Mm-hmm. And it's always one that I almost feel like I need to put an asterisk by. And that's not because I don't believe that divorce is an adverse childhood experience. But unlike I can't tell you any time where physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, neglect is a positive thing, right. Or intimate partner violence is never a positive thing, mm-hmm. So there's sometimes where I've seen friends even, it's like, okay, it's going to be healthier for the child if you split up.
Right.
And I also recognize that my audience is, probably a third of them are parents that have gone through a divorce with their partner. Um, and so it's this weird, almost an outlier, I think, just of how I think about it. But I'd love to get your kind of expert opinion. Is when you look at the ACEs, or we can just think about childhood trauma in general. How do you see divorce, which is such a complex thing and so different for everyone? Sort of, how does that thinking and your expertise inform your thinking about divorce as a childhood trauma?
Sure, yeah, and I think you bring up such an important point in that the research has shown pretty consistently over the last few decades that actually the conflict between parents, the high amount of conflict and the stress associated with that is actually more harmful for kids than the divorce itself.
Yeah,
So essentially, if kids are living in this high conflict environment, and can you imagine cortisol and stress hormones and like kind of fight or flight
yeah,
on all the time because they're not sure if and when mom or dad are going to turn some of that violence towards them. I think it's a
yeah,
little bit of a walking on eggshells situation. Um, so I mean, I think there's definitely certain circumstances where parents breaking up is actually a good thing. It
mhm,
actually means that conflict and that fighting is stopping. And so that might actually be a little bit of a release on that stress valve in the home.
yeah. Yeah, and so because the other thing that's I think interesting about too is how traumatic it is both for the adult and the children involved, because it's such a disruption for everybody. And just again, being in my 40s now and having friends that have gone through, coworkers who have gone through divorce, some in a fairly amicable way, others in a just horrific way that was really traumatizing in many ways, all of us around the individuals as well.
Hmm.
I wonder, when you look at working with survivors, and I love that, survivors of childhood divorce. I just am interested in, where does sort of forgiveness, where does, because the relationships change, the parents don't always do a great job of managing some of the feelings about partners. I
Right.
just, as you do this work, I like, and this I think is a pretty loaded question, so take your time as much as you need. How much of that is kind of the self-healing versus there's still a lot of them in this family system, and how much is it working to maybe find their role externally within that system
Yeah.
as well? I kind of wonder how you look and conceptualize the internal pain of the trauma, but also, hey, I'm still in this family system with all of its positives and craziness, like any family really has.
Yeah, I mean, it's, if you think about it, it's a very complex issue. It's not just, okay, the divorce papers are signed and,
Yep.
we've wiped our hands of this and it's all done. I mean, there's in-laws, there's multiple relationships wrapped up in one marriage. And so it's a loss on many different levels, not only of a marriage that we hoped would work, right, but of a
Yep.
parent-child relationship. And, one parent inevitably is going to get full custody and another's not.
Yeah.
And so it's a loss on so many levels. And I think, like, for me as a childhood survivor of divorce, I feel like this is a constantly evolving healing process, right? I mean, I may run into different scenarios or relationships over the course of my life where it's like, oh, it's become really clear to me that my experience with divorce has really informed my view on how I operate in the world as an individual, how I operate in relationships, and probably the intersection of those two things too. So I think the healing process could be a lifelong thing, just like it could be with other ACEs and other traumas that occur. I think it's a constantly evolving and changing kind of healing process. And I like that you brought up forgiveness, because I think a lot of people can walk away from that situation with a lot of resentment and animosity and hatred. And, we've all heard, I think, those stories of, like the custodial parent kind of bad mouthing the other parent. And, we're really setting up, a kind of a war zone type situation if, we don't handle the aftermath of the divorce in a healthy way. And I guess I say healthy pretty lightly, in that
Yeah.
that's going to look differently for everybody. And part of one of my reasons of being interested in this is, a couple of years ago I actually wrote an ebook called Crash Course for Divorce, and it's really like a testimonial of people that have survived sort of divorce in childhood and adulthood. Like, they've
Mm-hmm.
separated and divorced from partners, and it's their real world experience with divorce, and it kind of says, like, this is what we did, this is what we could have done differently. And it comes from people's real experience with this divorce and this phenomena. So I really felt called to put that experience out into the world, so people could say, hey, there's other people that are going through this.
Yeah.
There's maybe a quote unquote right and wrong way to go through this process. And I feel like, as a psychologist, I'm not the only one that should hold on to that
Yeah.
knowledge and information. There's no reason why people shouldn't be able to pick up a book or a couple of books and say, okay, this is kind of a general outline of how this should be managed, right?
Yeah. Wonderful. And I think, one of my I think hesitation again with divorce being on the adverse child, again, not arguing that it shouldn't be on that list of aces, but the other thing, it's like I think, and there's this mentality, and it kind of sounds like something that we see happening on TV shows or movies, but having seen friends go through it in real life, I get it. It's like, oh, we need to almost keep the marriage intact for the child. And then here is a trainer who doesn't have 90 minutes to talk about one of the, like, divorce as an ace. I kind of like name it and then go on to neurobiology and epigenetics and all that
Right.
fun stuff. It's like, hey, if you do get divorced, you're going to screw up your kid. Here's the proof of that. And obviously, screw up your kid is not a clinical term, but I'm worried about, like, eliciting that reaction. Is like, on one side of the divorce, we may not have any aces in our child's upbringing at this point. If we move forward with this, we are now putting them on the ace, and obviously just one ace is not that detrimental if protective factors are there and everything. But at the same time, it's like, hey, you could try, you're going to traumatize your kid by doing this. So, it's this interesting thing that again, and maybe you can give me advice as well as anybody else out there, is like, is there a better way to talk about this, instead of kind of, hey, if you take this step, your kid's going to be screwed up.
Right. Yeah. And I think, that, again, that picture of healthy and normal is going to look so differently in each family, in each
Yeah.
household. So it's, I'm an expert in this area, but it's, I'm well aware that my advice or my experience or, the research that I've studied may work for, 5 families, but it may not work for another 5 families. Right. And I think this idea of staying together for the kids is really this kind of old-fashioned approach to keeping a family unit together. But if there's domestic violence, if there's objects and people being hit and thrown across the house, then you're already creating those aces for the child, and you're almost creating multiple aces. Whereas if you were to say, hey, this marriage and this relationship really isn't working, and you're communicating with the kids, and obviously they're seeing what's going on, right? Kids are not, kids are little sponges. They're kind of soaking up everything that they're seeing. So their kids are already kind of aware that, hey, things are not going well here. And so it's not going to be a shock or surprise to them that mommy and daddy are not staying together, or my parents are not staying together. So I think by preventing one ace, we might actually be creating more aces,
Yeah.
and maybe inadvertently and maybe not even consciously, but, is staying together creating more harm than good, right? And I think that's kind of maybe a question people considering this process need to ask themselves, like, is throwing things across the house, or pushing each other into walls and things like that, like, is that doing more damage than the divorce itself?
Right.
And when you divorce, it's an example of how to have conflict in a relationship and resolve it appropriately versus, not so appropriately in the realm of verbal abuse or emotional abuse or physical abuse. I mean, do you
Yeah.
want your child to see, hey, relationships don't always work out and there's conflict, and we can resolve them? Or relationships and conflict looks like throwing each other against the wall and punching and hitting and screaming and throwing, right? I mean, it's you're kind of determining that viewpoint for your child.
Absolutely. And it's like I said, it's just that kind of interesting dynamic where an ace could actually be positive. And that's I think like that uncomfortable. And I guess if you have an abusive parent at home, maybe incarceration could also be a positive thing. But it's just, yeah, it's that odd thing of how do we kind of speak to this as well. And one of the things that I do agree that it is an adverse experience is that just sort of disruption of the at least partially of the attachment process, especially with younger kids, where working to create that secure attachment, secure base. And I kind of wonder, in your experience and your work, how do you see that huge family disruption of, hey, on Monday we were all living in the same house. Next week, dad, mom's in different apartments. Like, how have you seen that disruption, really impact sort of the ability to form or even maintain healthy, secure attachments, which then hopefully translates into healthy relationships in their own young adult to adult lives?
Sure. No, I love this question because it makes me talk about my dissertation, which, as you can imagine, took years and months of blood, sweat, and tears. So
You got the
I've
PhD behind your name, though.
yes,
So
exactly. So I earned that very
yes.
large piece of paper that I wrote. So, but I've always been a fan of attachment theory, and in graduate school, I was fortunate enough to be my mentor studied attachment and families, and so we actually did this study with families that had one child, at least one child in between the ages of 8 and 13, which is this middle childhood phase. It's kind of
Yeah.
like they're not a kid, but they're not a teen. It's kind of this understudied age group in kids. And so my dissertation kind of said, like, hey, is it possible that if a child has one, good attachment relationship with either mom or dad, can that kind of protect them from
Mm.
the negative impacts of conflict? And so we did some attachment measures, we did some kids reporting on the conflict in the home, and then we did the kids reporting on their own mental health and well-being. And so we kind of looked at all these different aspects, and it turns out that having a close attachment, having a secure attachment with one parent, particularly mom
Hmm.
tends to be the more stereotypically nurturing parent,
Yeah.
and dad's kind of like the rough and tumble kind of parent historically and stereotypically, right? So it's a different relationship with dad, although it's probably a close one.
Mm.
So the results of this were that, yeah, a secure attachment with mom can actually almost act as a little bit of a buffer between negative, experiences, conflict in the home, and behavioral health or mental health symptoms in the child.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that just says a lot, right? I mean, having just one close relationship in the home, whether one parent leaves or stays or otherwise, having that one strong bond with the parent can actually be this protective factor, right? It can actually sometimes like a little bit cushion the negative that's kind of going on, and protect the kids from experiencing issues, as it's happening and in the future.
Yeah. And such I that idea of that one relationship, right? That can take you through, just the power of that research. If you have that one person, that your life outcomes, again, you're protected from a lot of those negative findings around childhood trauma, which is,
Mhm.
so to have that in the family system, and I wonder, maybe, as you look at the work with survivors of divorce in childhood, like what are some of the common issues? Because I think when we talk about attachment, I think where I was fortunate, again, having divorce between my mom and dad happened in my early 20s, is I got 20 years of love in that family system. And
Mhm.
my family wasn't perfect, obviously, ended in divorce, but at the same time, I was lucky enough never to question whether my mom and dad loved me in there.
Right.
And
Right.
so I got to take that in. And I wonder, as especially going through it at the age kind of that you did, just bringing up those questions. Again, it sounds like things you see on TV shows, but as therapists, we see it in the office of, having the guilt carried on with, maybe did I cause the breakup, those sort of things. So as
Yeah.
people seek you out in either that therapy or coaching role, what are some of the maybe the commonality of issues that you see with a lot of the folks you work with? What are they trying to overcome to create healthy relationships in their own life?
Sure, yeah, and I kind of see this as operating on two levels, right? So you have like the relationship with yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
self-love, self-sabotage, those patterns that we get into in the relationship that we have with ourselves, and then the relationship with others, right? I think our relationships occur on those two different dimensions, and so I think depending on how old you were when your parents divorced, if you really see the world in very, kind of black and white and concrete terms, it's going to be easy for a kid to say, well, mom and dad split up and they're arguing and it's all my fault, right? And so they're internalizing all this guilt of,
Mhm.
and that's just the way a kid sees the world at that
Yeah.
age, right? Is that when bad things happen, it's my fault, right?
Yeah.
Which may be the complete opposite of what's going on, but that's the message that the kid is, kind of creating in their mind. So, and then, I think it also depends on where the child falls. Are they the oldest? Are they the youngest? Are they the middle child, right? Because, me growing up as the oldest of two, I was kind of I was thrust into this parent role at a very
Mhm.
young age, right? I had a younger brother. My mom worked as a nurse full time, right? Dad, we saw once in a while, right? But essentially, my childhood ended when the
Yeah.
divorce happened, right? I mean, I wasn't forced to take on that responsibility, but I think just the kind of who I am
Yeah.
personality wise, like I was like, okay, I'm going to do it, right? I'm going to like make sure that everything's okay, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm not alone in kids having that response. Whereas I think, my brother and younger, or the youngest of the family system, may see and experience things completely different than that, right? Where
Mhm.
instead of being the caregiver, he's receiving all the care, right? So
Yeah.
now he was raised by my brother was raised by two women, right? His sister and his mom, right? And so his world and his reality is completely different than mine. And so I think it's really important to take that into consideration. What was your position in the family, and what role did the divorce put you into after it happened? And how does that still relate to how you manage life and relationships today, right? I
Yeah.
am still the hard worker, responsible, one, and till this day, and this is 30 years later, right? And I think like one of my reasons for creating this coaching program for survivors of divorce was that I don't know that people even make the connection between, hey, I was thrust into this parent role at age 9 or 10, and I'm still the one that's taking care of people in my life. And what costs does that have to me as a person, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, if I'm always the one that's taking care of other people, and, achieving all these great things. And, I'm almost like living for other people and not for
Mhm.
myself. And so I think that
Mm.
that can kind of create this branch between, well, I'm kind of a human doing, but I'm not a human being, right? I'm not really okay with
Oh, I
being,
love that. Yeah.
who I am in the moment, right? So my self-worth is based on how many people I can take care of and how many achievements I can accomplish versus, just existing in the
Yeah.
world as I am.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing, like with relationships with others, I mean, if that reality is disrupted as a kid, where you learn, okay, well, if people love me, then they leave, right? That
Hmm.
becomes your template for how you see relationships ending, and so that's inevitably going to have an impact on how close you let people in, right? If at all. I think some people might just write off relationships altogether, right? Well, if marriages end like that, then why am I even going to get into a relationship,
Mm.
right? Or you have those people that maybe get married repeatedly throughout their lives, and something's missing, right? Something's just not clicking, not connecting. There might be a lot of conflict in that relationship, or they just feel like there's always something missing in that relationship. And could it be that that thing that's missing is this idea that relationships are hard, right? Conflict happens, but conflict is definitely resolvable. But I didn't really get the chance to see that because mom and dad fought a lot, and then they were poof, they were separate, right? So I didn't get to see the inner workings of, hey, people won't always get along, but conflict can be constructive, and we can kind of talk through this and work through this versus, oh, we're fighting, okay, I'm out of here, right?
Right. Well, and again, that so much of that to me goes back to that kind of attachment, maybe in a different way of, I think we learn from our parents as well how adults treat each other, and I think it's a great insight. Is yeah, we get the templates between our relationship and our caregivers and parents, but also watching that dynamic play out as well and carrying those lessons, good or bad, into adult life with us as well. It's powerful to see that kind of that personal narrative. And as you were talking as well, it did kind of hit me too, is like how many books have been written about codependency. So growing up in a family with addiction or surviving violence in the household. And yet, again, divorce is just, because it happens to so many, it almost gets normalized as this event that, I don't know what the percentage of, by the time kids 18, how many of them have been in split up marriage. I know it's about 50%, but I know not everybody in that 50% has children. So, but so many people, like, I just think back to my high school friends, probably a third of them had divorced parents. So it's like, there's maybe not that urge to, or that recognition is, yeah, I need to get help to overcome this, because it's not, the books aren't out there, the language isn't the same way, which is why I love the survivors of childhood divorce. Like your language, I think, brings that back and hopefully gives people some acknowledgement of, yeah, something happened to me that I might still be carrying around some of the wounds from that into my adult life too. That's
Yeah.
powerful language. I think that hopefully gives people permission to take a look at it in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of why, I'm calling my program Breaking Free,
Yeah.
the group coaching program for survivors of divorce is because, everybody deserves a chance to break free from the templates,
Yes.
the dialogue that, they were taught early on, even if, again, they're still not at that point where they're making the connection between what happened 20, 30 years ago and what's happening in my relationships now. But part of how I see my role as a coach is to help bridge that connection between those two things. Hey,
Yeah.
is this in any way related to what happened? And sometimes the answer may be no, right? No, that has
Right.
nothing to do with it. But if it does, how can we dig a little bit deeper and continue to make connections between what I saw back then, how I manage relationships now, and what is a healthy relationship? How do you navigate conflict, right? How do you if you survive divorce in childhood, you didn't really get the luxury of seeing two parents fight and resolve conflict, right? We kind of missed out on that example. So we just think like, okay, conflict is like, the nail in the coffin, right? And that means a relationship is done. And that's most definitely not the case. And I wouldn't have a job as a psychologist and a family therapist if that were, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's many people that come to me at the end of their marriage and they're like, okay, help us, right? And
Yeah.
so there wouldn't be couples therapy, there wouldn't be family therapy if conflict wasn't manageable and could be navigated through.
Right. So an interesting with your language, and I'm kind of fascinated by your use of coach versus therapist, and you talked a little bit about that in your introduction, but I wonder how first of all, kind of a little bit more of why with that PhD behind your name, going in, and nothing against coaches, but I know as a trained therapist, you're consciously making that move. And then I wonder, is there different approaches that you utilize as a coach versus maybe somebody specifically coming to you with for therapy? Because obviously with your work in the military, trauma is something you think about on both sides of that equation. So I just kind of wonder, when you decided to go towards this as a coach, kind of the thinking behind that, and how does that differ than maybe your role as a therapist when you put on that hat, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, I love that question. I mean, I think, being in full-time clinical work for the past 10 years, while it is so rewarding and I love it, I've realized that my reach is very minimal, right? So my reach is limited to the hour at a time with one client or one family or one couple, right? And, with the divorce rates being 65, 70, close to 70%, the majority of people are survivors of divorce now
Yeah.
versus coming from solid homes. And so as a therapist, I'm not going to be able to reach much further outside of my therapy room. I could maybe do groups, I could
Mm-hmm.
maybe reach within my local area, but the nice thing about having a group coaching program online is that I could reach the entire world and the entire country, right? My
Yeah.
reach could be bigger, and I can touch way more people with this educational and supportive process versus, hey, there's something wrong with you, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
stigma associated with therapy. Oh, okay, well, this is a therapist telling me that I need therapy, or I'm calling the therapist and I need therapy. There's
Yeah.
still that stigma in 2020 that
I
there's
know.
got to
I
be
hate
something
it, but
wrong
it's
with you
there.
in order to be in therapy. And that's not the case. But if the majority of people are survivors of divorce, then that just means, hey, we missed an opportunity to be educated in this area of relationships, right? And
Yeah.
what better person to educate you as a survivor myself, but also this person that has decades of working clinically and in educational settings and in research. I mean, I basically am like kind of a walking encyclopedia for, family issues and divorce. And so why not be able to share that knowledge and experience with as many people outside the hour by hour, impact that I can have in my therapy office.
Absolutely. Very cool. One of the questions, and if you're listening to this somewhere into the future, we are recording this on April 8th, 2020. So you have, during this pandemic that we're in, all of us are being told stay at home. And I know that a lot of folks that have been, people that I've trained, people that I connect with professionally around trauma-informed care and other related topics, are really worried right now about a lot of these kids and some of the family dynamics that we're talking about, where that conflict might manifest as verbal or physical violence. And I know there's so much stress right now on family systems, whether that stress is, hey, we just have to spend 24/7 in a house together and not get too much of an escape, or we have to do that and we've lost our job, or I've got to go out in the world and risk my life to, provide care, sell groceries, so on and so forth. So, I'm hearing so many people that I know listen to this podcast just really worried about family systems that may have already been under a lot of stress and had some of
Yes.
these things bubble up, but maybe we're right on the edge of that stress. And I think the stress we all feel right now can bring out the best in people, but also the worst in people. So,
Yes.
I just kind of wonder, with your expertise on relationships and again, maybe healing some of those past wounds so you can have healthy relationships in your life. I would love to just kind of pick your brain a little bit of if somebody's listening to this and they're about ready to pull each other's hair out because, even on a good day, it might not be perfect, but now it's
Right.
so encapsulated.
Yeah.
Well, what are some like maybe advice that you're giving to folks from your experience with working with family dynamics of how do we maybe even use this time to get healthier or at least survive it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, gosh, that's there. I think there are so many right answers to that question, and I think you're right. I mean, we are, speaking of ACEs, we're in a collective
Yes.
traumatic experience right now. I
Yeah.
mean, there's loss and grief on so many levels as far as, just physical health and emotional health and then financial health, people losing jobs, people losing livelihoods, and maybe even losing their homes. Right. And so this
Absolutely.
is a collective traumatic experience across the world, a global pandemic, as they're calling it, right? And I think one of the things that comes to mind is I haven't been able to physically meet with my clients and my
Yeah.
patients for almost a month now, and
Yeah.
that's a huge part of being a therapist, is being in the room with somebody.
Mhm.
And so there's even a lack of human connection for some of us out there. And I think I've done probably, I hope, a good job of sending out resources to the families that I work with. Hey, here's a video on YouTube that kind of talks about, what's within the realm of your control and what's outside the realm of your control. I think when we're in an overwhelmed state of mind, anxiety can really convince us that, there's a lot that we need to worry about. There's a lot that we need to take on. And I think it's helpful to make that distinction between what's within my control, which is, maybe being able to make money and then put food in the fridge and, make as many payments as I can, versus, how many cases and how many deaths and all this information that we're getting from the news and media, which can really be overwhelming. And so I think, making that distinction in your mind, what's within my realm of control and what's outside of.
Yeah.
A second note, limiting media and social media exposure. I mean, I think 90% of what's advertised in the media is negative. And so if you think about that from a mental health, emotional standpoint, if you're getting 90% information negative, that's going to have an impact on how you feel and how you interact with other people. And if you're in these close, confined, environments of your home, that's definitely going to have an explosive type impact, right? Here I am getting negative information. I'm surrounded by people that I love most of the time, but I'm not particularly liking right now. I'm limited in maybe how much I can physically exercise or get
Yeah.
outside or do my normal routine. And so I guess I think I could probably summarize this in maybe 5 major points or recommendations, right? So number one, making that distinguish between, every day, what am I going to worry about that's within my control and what's not, right?
Yeah.
Um, number two, how often am I going to listen to the media or check social media or get information coming in? Is once a day sufficient enough to get the information on number of cases in the local area or lockdowns or stay-at-home orders or things like that? Probably, right? I don't know that information is coming out more frequently or urgently than once a day.
Mhm.
Getting outside, being outside is still free, right? And of course, with social distancing rules in place, but I've seen neighbors in my neighborhood that I didn't even know existed in the last 2 years, right? I mean, everybody has a dog now and
Yeah.
everybody's walking them. So it's like, if you do have opportunities to be outside and play, or walk, or, be outside with a pet or just walk together as a family, definitely getting outdoors and not letting the walls close in on you.
Mhm.
And I think number four, probably exercise, right? Along with that, getting outdoors, but also physically moving your body. those guidelines of 30 minutes a day of moving, right? Can you walk around the neighborhood a couple times and have that be 30 minutes? And what we know from not only a trauma perspective, but also just a mental health perspective is that physical movement is actually a natural stress reliever, and it produces endorphins, which is kind of a natural antidepressant, right? So it's a way for us to relieve stress. It's a way for us to kind of physically release a lot of that stress and anxiety that we're carrying around. And number five, it's easy to have our worlds really kind of narrow in now, and us really kind of like close in. But I think staying connected and sending a text or making a phone call or FaceTiming, or, I've seen a number of people having Zoom parties with, happy hours and things like that. I mean, as much as you can connect with the people, and, we're all connected in this experience, right? If you can think of kind of an invisible string connecting all of us through this really difficult experiences, we all will have each other regardless, right? We're all in this together. And, I think staying connected is so important right now.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. I know my listeners will find, that useful. And I think some of those just reminders to do what we know is healthy. Because I mean, one of the things, like, it is so easy to get stuck in front of CNN for 2 or 3 hours. And I think some of us are actually who've worked in mental health, or I've done a lot of work in public health too. It's like, we've been talking about this for a while. So it's like, we need to kind of know what's going on while not getting sucked into it at the same time, which is a tough dance to do, but I think so important right now as well. So this has been a great conversation. Like I said, I was really excited to have this when I saw it come out. I'd love to wrap up. You mentioned one of your book titles. I just love if people are interested, and this conversation sort of resonated with them. And obviously we'll put these on the show notes at traumainformedlens.org for folks. But just as we kind of wrap up, maybe telling if people are interested in the coaching you're doing, some of your other work, what are some resources? How might people get connected with you?
Great. Yeah. So my coaching business is called Change the Tide Personal Coaching. And so my website is changethetide.coaching.com. And so on that website, I have a list of all my upcoming programs. Like I mentioned, I'm rolling out this online group coaching program specifically for survivors of childhood divorce. And I also offer individual coaching for those people that may not feel comfortable in a group setting. And then the divorce book that I mentioned earlier, it's called Crash Course for Divorce, and it's actually on Amazon. I think it's like $7 or $8. It's very affordable. But like I mentioned, it's a compilation of, an education, a crash course basically on child development and what parents need to know from a developmental perspective. A little bit of attachment theory is in there too. And then, the nice piece about it is the testimonials, the survivors themselves really speaking to people out there that might be going through that process of, this is what we did, this is what I wish we could have done differently or better, because we're really the ones that were on the front lines, so to speak, and we've been through that experience, and we want that experience to benefit others. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as Change the Tide Coaching too. So yeah. That's
excellent. Well, and what a great, if you're sitting at home with some time on your hands, like I said, I'm challenging people, just tune up your mental health a little bit. And it sounds like this program and getting to know you over this hour, I'm sure a lot of us could probably use a tune up on this area. So this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And like I said, it's been a fascinating thing I've struggled with for a long time. And in this conversation, I know really has helped me kind of process my own struggles with divorce as an ace. So this has been great. I want to thank you so much. I want to thank the audience for listening. Again, traumainformedlens.org. We'll put up Angela's contact information and all that, links to her book and all those good things. And just a final reminder, everybody out there, please take care of yourself. Do focus on self-care, whether, and just a shout out, I know, a lot of the medical professionals I work with are getting well-deserved press, but I always like to say, just keep the folks working in the homeless shelters, the child welfare residential clinics, all those folks that sometimes are barely making a livable wage are going in to pretty dangerous situations every day. And just please take care of yourself. If you're like me and don't have to go into those areas each day, try to find just a little way to say thank you. I think that's what people need right now is a thank you. And if you can give more, that's great as well. So Angela, thanks so much. Stay healthy, stay safe. And again, you can find all our information at traumainformedlens.org. Thank you, everybody. Stay healthy.